A number of U.S. governors have declared June to be Nuclear Family Month, as an opposition to Pride Month, which got me thinking, where does the concept of the nuclear family actually come from? Not just the etymology, but the history and intention behind it. Has it always been defined as a husband, wife, and their children? Or has its definition changed over the years? Turns out that phrase, that concept, not only came from some very weird origins that I did not expect, nothing to do with the atomic age, but has been completely reinvented multiple times over, and only recently brandished as a reason for the downfall of society. Mostly because it never really existed, at least not in the format I was taught. The common modern definition is two adults and their children that form a family unit. Sometimes it adds that they need to cohabitate, or that the children may be biological or adopted. Others specify that there should be a legal marriage, or that the couple needs to be a man and a woman. It is used today in both opposition to extended family networks where grandparents, aunts, and uncles, or other family may take major roles in raising children, as well as non-traditional families that can be anything from single parents to same-sex couples to polycules and more. In fact, it seems to be quite broadly and unevenly defined, which points to its origins as being, well, something less traditional. Just because the nuclear family may be an ideal doesn't make it a reality. I mean, who has the time to do all of that alone? I barely have the time to take care of my daily to-do list, let alone handle the big stuff. If you've ever had to go looking for a new doctor, you understand what I mean. That's why I'm so happy that the sponsor for today's video is ZocDoc. Every time I move, every time I hit another age milestone, every time I do something kind of stupid like get a sunburn, I realize just how much I keep putting off finding a doctor. But that means searching through name after name, digging up reviews, figuring out who takes my insurance, and all to find months-long waiting lists if they're even taking new patients. Sure, it's something I keep up with, but so often it's put to the side until I have health issues that I can't wait that long for. That's where ZocDoc comes in. They let you easily search through 150,000 providers who are local and in-network, which includes dentists to primary care to psychiatrists. The reviews are right there so you can find an option that works for your needs. And even better, they show you a list of available appointments and you can instantly book. No phone calls or leaving voicemails and hoping for a response, just a straightforward system that lays everything out, and that means you can prioritize based on what you need right now. And it's free to use. They have over 200 specialties, so you can find a doctor who can specifically help you. I know so many of you are in this exact predicament, putting it off because you're busy, stressed, or don't even know where to start. I've absolutely been there, and we both know we shouldn't keep waiting until something goes wrong before we finally deal with it. You deserve to have someone in your corner before the crisis hits. With ZocDoc, you can book your appointment and see a doctor fast, usually within 24 to 72 hours, sometimes even the same day. So when I remember that I need to go see a dermatologist after yet another summer sunburn, I can set up an appointment right now and see someone before I put it off again. Taking care of your health just got easier. Head to ZocDoc.com/Nicole Rudolph to get started and check that appointment off your to-do list. Thank you to ZocDoc for sponsoring today's video and for helping us all take better care of our health. The phrase nuclear family is listed in the Old English Dictionary as appearing in the mid-1920s, which isn't wrong, but it's only part of the story. To start, we need to turn to Freud. Yep, that is the direction this is going. In 1908, Freud used the term nuclear complex to refer to the origin of a neuroses that would develop in childhood around, well, all the stuff Freud usually liked to talk about. It's a use of nuclear, as in the nucleus, the center or seed. It's actually from the same base as nut. When the Oedipus Complex was coined in 1910, he connected the concepts together. Thus, the first use of the phrase's origins was to refer to how children, specifically young boys, developed questions about nature that weren't properly answered by their parents, and thus developed a sense of competition with their fathers and repressed feelings about their mothers. Basically, a shorthand for how the relationships within a family unit are supposedly formed, which is important as that term gets picked up and carried by others working in similar subjects. Bronislaw Malinowski, a Polish anthropologist, spent most of his career researching non-European family units, traveling the world to develop his own theories under the umbrella of Freudian theory, which mainly focused on bourgeois European society. He basically wanted to know how other societies developed their versions of familial relationships and taboos. Also, it is the 19 teens and 20s, so we're not talking about the most educated of approaches here. Malinowski was in Papua New Guinea at the time, trying to analyze how the matrilineal families formed relationships within the Trobriand Islanders. More specifically, he was looking to see if the Oedipus complex still appeared despite variations of the family unit. Publishing an article on the topic in 1924 and then setting it into his book, Sex and Repression in Savage Society, in 1927, used the phrases nuclear complex and family complex fairly interchangeably. He actually notes they are used that way. His opinion, was that in this case, where the mother raises her children within her family, and the father is really not present, but instead her brothers remain in the unit to be part of child rearing, the complex changes to be competition with the uncle and repressed feelings towards sisters. While the validity of these conclusions isn't really the point here, the usage of these proto-terms being specifically about this subject is pretty hard to ignore. Malinowski sort of used them to refer to a family unit, but in a Freudian way of how these complexes emerge and form. It wasn't the original usage of the term nuclear complex. If anything, it was a slight misunderstanding of it, but it brought it closer to application to a family development rather than an individual's development. Important because all of that psychoanalysis stuff was really focused on defining the family organization around the late 1920s. So those two phrases were picked up and shoved together by many people reading Malinowski's works. Nuclear family complex became a way to refer to the formation of a family and their relationships based on societal influences and structure. One family forms within bourgeois French society, another within the Trobriand Islanders, another within lower-class rural America, etc. By the 1950s, the complex portion of the phrase had mostly been dropped, as had been the concept of formation of relationships. Now it was just a nuclear family as a static entity. However, it did not mean a straight family unit or even a two-parent family unit. It was used in opposition to extended families, where grandparents, aunts and uncles, and others were part of the care and raising of children, often living on the same property or even in the same home. The entire point of this research was to ask who is influencing the children, which would allow the psychoanalysis of how they formed their adult self and adult problems. Anthropologists and psychologists alike began using the phrase in their growing works on the Anglo-American family and how it was changing from generations before, a topic that was now digestible enough for magazines and newspaper articles aimed at the common person. Was the change in authority figures for the better or worse? Are teachers replacing rule makers we previously found in grandparents? Will this cause confusion if a child has too many part-time caretakers? How do they create a hierarchy of respect with so many unrelated adults? All part of a flurry of questions coming up as the baby boom generation first left the house to start school. This more casual usage of the term was picked up in the 1950s, not to gesture at how wonderful the modern family was, but to disparage how isolated they were becoming. While a nuclear family could thrive with an extensive and active community, the amount of effort it takes to raise children and marriage without extended family was considered intense, even in the 1950s, that era that is often glorified as the peak of the nuclear family. This article from 1951 quotes Jeffrey Gorer, an anthropologist speaking on the BBC, about how the stress from focusing on the husband-wife bond causes isolation. He believed the nuclear family was what was specifically causing divorce. And this was not a unique opinion. Another article from 1950 states that, important as the family is, it is too small a unit to survive long without the support of a community of families. This one from 1960 called the situation of a nuclear family forced to form as people kept moving and communities separated as a condition tragically wasteful of human resources. They realized, even back then, that with an aging portion of the population that was no longer part of the same household as the younger portion, there would be a serious problem, both for the older who now needed specialty late life care, and for the younger who do not have help with children. Every article I came across returned to the same solution: better and stronger communities, without which the family and society would be strained to the point of failure. So if you've ever felt like your modern situation is impossible to manage, know that even in the 1950s, when we were at our economic peak for the middle class, and when most households had one adult that did not have to be employed outside of the home, they recognized how difficult and untenable it was. Instead of the old kinship networks, the new nuclear family relied on developing networks of other families, or bringing in family friends to replace the void. I definitely had quite a few unrelated aunts and uncles growing up, as well as a number of close families with kids my age that responsibility could be shifted between. And though the purpose of the numerous studies on how these networks developed or functioned were meant to judge their effectiveness, it's more important to this research that we recognize that was a discussion at all. That the nuclear family was not seen as a better thing, just a result of the modern influences like 2 out of 5 families moving away or retired parents living in Florida instead of next door. The nuclear family, at its start, was seen as an opposition to the extended kinship networks of previous generations. This would change, as we know. The idea of a nuclear family being the modern ideal wasn't formed because it was great. It was formed in opposition to other social concerns. First up was divorce. In 1969, California, more specifically Ronald Reagan as governor of, legalized no-fault divorce. It spread to other states quickly, and the 1970s was abuzz with the controversial topic. The divorce rate rose quickly, but then settled. But the panic over the death of the American family was already set in motion. Of note, even today, with all of our record keeping, the divorce rate is still based on some really skewed statistics of overall marriages to divorces per year. Something that doesn't account for people having multiple divorces or even how long those marriages actually lasted. Globally, there are around 130 million births a year and 60 million deaths. The same math would say around 50% of births result in death. Spoilers, we all die eventually. The hot topics of dissolving marriages, single mothers, and even working mothers became a swirling conversation of childcare and mental health. For the children, obviously, not the mothers. Should there be universal income so single mothers can stay home? Supposedly, when they tried that in the 1940s, it just incentivized men to leave relationships because they weren't really needed. How about accessible childcare? To that they said that children weren't growing attachments to their mothers when they were gone that much. They'd be unstable and prone to nervous issues. The list goes on and on. All comparative to the now suddenly healthy nuclear family with two parents, a mother always there for her children, and a father who was there sometimes because he worked outside of the home and wasn't really the important one here, I guess. Those extended networks that were long the contrast to the nuclear family became additions to the core. Articles with titles like In Defense of the Nuclear Family and The Nuclear Family, Will It Survive the 20th Century? Started popping up in the 1970s. Some argued that such family structures bound everyone into a prescribed relationship with inflexible patterns that would just perpetuate the current issues in society and marriage. Others argued that it was the only way to provide stability and dependable relationships. The nuclear family was used almost interchangeably with marriage, which seems like a grievous oversight, even at that time, as the definition of marriage was undergoing drastic changes, accepting interracial unions and two-income households. But whether accurate or not, article after article was claiming that research showed that the nuclear family with a married man and woman raising their children was obviously the best way to improve societal problems like divorce, generational differences, isolation, and aggression. Though, as this 1975 article from a professor of sociology admits, we just have to change nuclear families from the authoritarian power structure to a companionship one. Then it'll work perfectly fine. I'm sure that'll be easy. The point here isn't that these arguments are right or wrong then or now, but that they were being made at all, that the nuclear family was presented as the victim and the answer to what the era saw as major social problems. We can look back and watch over the last roughly 50 years as community has dissolved, third places disappeared, individual income has lagged, and everything that made the nuclear family possible has faded away. If it was ever possible. And if this was where the use of the concept of the nuclear family stopped changing, it would be understandable. Still in use to refer to the small family unit as opposed to the larger, extended ones of various types. Whether a core group with add-ons is better than an extended one. Definitely not what Freud meant to start, but reasonable. However, as we all know, it didn't stay that way either. The next evolution of the nuclear family wasn't even to protest gay marriage, but it was setting it up for that fight. Rather than the 1950s approach, which acknowledged the small family unit was an invention of the 20th century, made possible or necessary by modernization, the 1980s and 90s proclaimed it an ancient family style. I came across multiple articles that dated it to at least 1,000 years old and gave it the credit for allowing modern society to evolve. I suppose, unsurprisingly, these most often came out of publications with a religious background. The nuclear family, so far as they were concerned, was what made the growth of modern Christianity possible. And now, with so many single-parent households, we were being threatened with being taken back to the Dark Ages. A crusade against the nuclear family was also a crusade against moral stability and religion, the things that originated together. This concern only grew as we reached the turn of the millennia. It didn't seem to matter that the 1990s was one of the most encouraging eras for the traditional family and their stability. The numbers weren't what they wanted to see. Households consisting of married couples with their children are now at their lowest level, falling from 45% of all households in 1960 to just 25.6 in 2001. Which doesn't account for an aging population median, as the baby boomer generation went from being those children that were still at home to their own children having already aged out of the home by that time. Lots of retired parents in that 74.4%. And the nuclear family, at least the healthy and positive nuclear family, was disappearing from media as well. Instead of Leave It to Beaver and the Brady Bunch, it was Married with Children, The Simpsons, Roseanne, and other dysfunctional families. I'm not making the problem up. It was a regular point of contention that I came across. It peaked in 2001 after President George Bush's chief domestic policy advisor, Margaret LaMontagne, was asked how the administration felt about the rise of single parenting and unmarried households.
I guess I would respond to say, so what?
Defenders of the nuclear family flipped out. They saw these fractured households as raising defective and dangerous children. After all, the Columbine shooter came from a single father situation after his mother died when he was young. Clearly, that was the problem. The nuclear family was being lauded as the only thing that could actually save society from spiraling into violence and chaos. I do want to stop and note that all of the articles I read around this era that had a deep concern over the loss of the nuclear family, none presented a case on how to fix said problem beyond aggressively discouraging anything else. The only thing that distracted the battle against single parents, unmarried couples, and childless couples in the early 2000s was, you guessed it, the gays. It combined all of the elements that were straining the popularity of the nuclear family, a couple that could not be married and biologically, in their minds, could not have children. The fight to legalize gay marriage didn't suddenly appear in the 21st century, but it was actually gaining traction. Other countries were legalizing it or creating common law options that encompassed a broad range of relationship types. Ironically, the new argument was that the nuclear family was at its peak when America supposedly was, in the 1950s. Not in the 19 teens and 20s, before communities spread out, as the 1950s actually argued. The nuclear family had completely changed definitions to mean the traditional, straight, Christian family with a mother, father, and at least two children, with gender roles clear cut and a hierarchy maintained. The last bastion of morality in a crumbling society. I would apologize for that sounding dramatic, but frankly, that's less ostentatious than many of the claims that I've heard over the years. Regardless, the history of the nuclear family shows us that it never actually existed in a pure and pristine or even successful form. Yes, there are some amazing pieces of literature out there that break down the multitude of reasons why the entire concept was a myth. I highly recommend The Way We Never Were by Stephanie Coontz. This is actually the exact book that got me into history to begin with. But we don't even need to go that deep into that argument. The actual use of the term in the 1950s was to compare it to the extended kinship networks that had been common just a few decades earlier. It was an era that was deeply concerned with isolation and stress on these family units. It wasn't glorified then. That didn't happen until groups needed something to contrast with the growing rates of divorce, single parents, and unmarried or childless couples. This magical idol that could be shaped into whatever they wanted it to be because it never really existed. Even the perfect renditions of it in media showed entire extended networks of kin or family friends. To pull from my own era of family sitcoms, the Mr. Feeney or Wilson on the other side of the fence, ready to offer sage advice. And none of that even touches on the fact that the term originates in Freud and his attempts to define the Oedipus Complex before settling on that term. The nuclear complex was meant to show how isolated families develop problems in their relationships. Whether you agree with Freud or not, it's kind of a funny thing to apply to the argument of it being the best system. But here's the thing. The true threat to the nuclear family isn't gay marriage or single parents, it's extended family networks, whether kinship or friendship. It's what was there before. The spinster aunt of a century ago didn't stop supporting overwhelmed parents. She just takes on many other forms now. The friend across town or the neighbor. It's the only way to modernize our society to actually support parents when the majority of people have to work and live far away from the family that raised them, if those people are willing or even able to help. Family is how we personally define it today, because we all need different versions. We don't have the economy or the community to return to a time when the nuclear family was a valid option for most. And arguing that it will cure all of our societal ills is frankly delusional. Making sure everyone has a good, stable support system, well, that might actually do something.